Good afternoon, baseball fans, and welcome back to Dan's Vintage Baseball PC. Do not be fooled by that fancy name. It's just me and some friends talking about baseball cards. And I guess I'm going to get a little philosophical today and start talking about some things that, are more sort of big picture collection related stuff. But I just want to play this clip first because I think it's kind of instructive. It's funny and it's instructive. So let me play this for you guys. And let's go
Dan,
there.
yes, I know, we got it. You like vintage cards, you like old cards, you like pre-war cards. What do you want us to say, bud? What do you want us to say? There's nothing that I don't already know that you have already known before.
What's up with Dan's collection? He collects guys that aren't in the Hall of Fame. Who the hell is Benny Koff anyway?
Oh my God. Guys, I love that. That's a small little snippet from a video that was put together by Mike Junkwax Hero in anticipation of our 4-person discussion panel for Hobby Palooza. It was all good fun. But, in every good joke, there's some truth. And there is some truth in what my two friends, Greg and Jake, are saying there. And it's, I mean, that who is Benny Koff anyway? It's true. Who the hell is Benny Koff? Well, I think Benny Koff is important, and we'll get into it in a little bit. But the genesis of this video is a couple of things. First of all, I had considered doing this video for a little bit, and I was discussing in text messages with some of my friends about my thinking about why do I collect obscure players. And last week I did an SGC reveal. Actually, no, it wasn't last week. It was Tuesday or Wednesday. And Bill James was the first player in there. And there's 2 cards of Bill James. And I thought, well, why do I collect Bill James? I need to kind of explain this because I'm always bringing up these, obscure players and their cards and, the low pop and the issues that no one's ever heard of, that kind of stuff. And I'm fascinated by that as a baseball card collector. But I'm also fascinated by that for a whole bunch of different reasons. So I sort of decided to break down why do I collect cards, period. And I came up with 5 reasons. The first of which is should be number one for everybody. And it's fun. It's a hobby and it's fun. And I love collecting cards because it's just, there's so many different reasons for it, but it's fun is the main thing. And I spoke about Greg for a second. I'll link to it. Greg had a video, I think it was yesterday or 2 days ago, where he was talking about, why his friends collect. And he was talking about Mookie Chilson, how Mookie Chilson's collecting style had affected him because Mookie is collecting stuff that normally wouldn't be traditionally collectible, like cards with pinholes or cards with writing on the back. But Greg said something, and why does Mookie collect this way? Because he freaking loves it, was what he said. And to me, that's the essence of why we collect. So number 1 is fun. Number 2 for me is history. And history isn't just history of baseball or history of these players individually or history of an era. It's American history. It's pop culture history. It's history of just an entire period of time. And I think, and I'll get into this a little bit later, but I think that's part of the reason I collect obscure players is because of the history that can be found in all of these cards. The third thing is art. And I've always talked about this, that some of these cards are wonderful little pieces of art. And my family and I went to Italy this summer, and we spent a lot of time in art museums. And a lot of the art museums in Italy are paintings of people who you would otherwise would have never heard of, who essentially preserved their immortality by paying some, a fantastic painter to paint them. And, now the third Duke of whatever is known because he's sitting in a museum, and now who he is because you just read about him, but you wouldn't know otherwise. I kind of feel that same way with baseball cards. That baseball cards capture people who you would never know otherwise. Fourth is obviously nostalgia, because obviously I collect 1970 set. I collect because that's the first set I collected as a kid. There's a lot of stuff And I collected as a teenager vintage cards, and there's a certain nostalgia to that too. There's what TJ Maxx has described as inherited nostalgia. So I'm collecting the 48 Braves because my uncle and my dad were fans. And so I think that that's something that is also important. And the fifth is obviously value. These cards cost money. I like the fact that some of them have gone up in value since I purchased them. And if I fall out of love with a card and I want to sell it, it's nice that it maintains or retains its value. So why do I collect? 5 reasons: fun, history, art, nostalgia, and value. So I think the obscure card thing is more about collecting for history. And I like to say this, and I've said it many times on live streams and on comments and in my own, that there are no common cards. Common cards, to me, is kind of a pejorative term that really doesn't speak the truth, because every single card has a story. Some stories are obviously more compelling than others, but I like to bring up, whenever I think of what's called a common card, I think of this card, Mickey Grasso. And I will be honest, I did not know who Mickey Grasso was before I purchased not this example. I actually owned a ungraded example of this in the build for my 1953 Bowman set. And I went out after I found out who Mickey Grasso was. I went out and bought like a nice presentable mid-grade version of it. But Mickey Grasso was a minor league baseball player in the early 40s who enlisted in the Army and went over to fight for his country in Northern Africa as a member of the Allies. He rose to the grade of a sergeant, and he was captured in northern Italy in, I think, 42 or 43 by the Nazis and sent to a prisoner of war camp, where he lived for 2 years under horrendous conditions. He made multiple escapes attempts, 3 of them. And if you're familiar with the movie The Great Escape, a lot of the people who made multiple escapes didn't live after the last escape. But he did live. And he finally escaped for good in 1944. And he made his way across Germany through the forests of Western Germany and made it to the Allied lines and almost got shot by Allied people because they didn't know who he was. He was emaciated. He lost 60 pounds in the prisoner of war camp. So Sergeant Grasso was saved ultimately and came back to the country and gained his weight back and made it back into the major leagues. And he was a backup catcher. And sure, if this was just a backup catcher who you'd never heard of before, you would say, well, this is a common card. This is anything but a common card. This is the card of an absolute American hero, a United States war hero, and a person who should be remembered, not just for playing baseball and appearing on this gorgeous 1953 Bowman card, but for being a person who literally was an American hero. So to me, that's when you say common card, you don't know what you're talking about, because every one of these guys has a story. And, we are, in many respects, caretakers of these cards. This beautiful Mickey Grasso card will outlive me, and the slab will outlive me, and some point someone else will own this card. Hopefully, decades from now, when I'm no longer around, somebody will own that Mickey Grasso card, and they'll be the caretaker of that card. So I like to talk about how I own certain cards, and I even coined the phrase "own appeal." Well, it's sort of caretaker appeal in a way, because you're the caretaker of this card, but also we're the caretakers of baseball history. We're the caretakers of American history. We're the caretakers of pop culture history. And by collecting all of these cards, all of these little tidbits of information, of photographs of important people of their time, I feel like I have an obligation to let it be known who these people are and how they're important. And of course, everybody knows Mickey Mantle and Jackie Robinson, but there are a lot of other players here who are important not only to baseball history, but to American history. And I've done some shows on these players. I did a show on Gabby Street I did a show on Mike Donlin, Al Rosen, Tommy Holmes, players who you wouldn't normally know. But their stories, I felt, demanded discussion. And of course, they aren't Mickey Mantle. And it was early in my channel history when I did a lot of these shows, but they're some of the least watched shows on my channel. But I feel that their stories demand discussion and demand that we let people know about them. So I wanted to show some examples of some of the players that I do collect, obscure players that I do collect. And of course, there was Bill James, who we saw in the SGC reveal. That card on the far right there is the Z-Nut, the 1924 Z-Nut. Highest graded, low pop, etc. But sometimes it's a low pop because nobody grades Bill James. But there's a really nice M101-4 or 5 in the middle there. It's an M101-5 blank back Sporting News cards, and then of course there is a gorgeous Crackerjack card there, and I'm collecting 1914 Boston Braves, who Bill James was the 26-game winner who won 2 games in the World Series. I've said that many times, but also kind of like the 1914 Braves, a supernova. Rose 1 year, had a fantastic season, and then just kind of faded into obscurity. And I think Bill James is important, not just because every pitcher who has a season like that should be remembered, but also because he's sort of instructive about, if you hurt your arm these days, you can get surgery and come back a year later and have a great career. Tommy John liked to talk about how he had a longer career after Tommy John surgery than he did before his surgery. But Bill James didn't have that opportunity in 1915 and 1916, and he ended up becoming an obscure pitcher in the PCL for Sacramento and getting a couple of Z-Nut cards. But I feel like, I don't know, not only that he's a 1914 Brave is why I collect him, but also because he's kind of instructive about, the history of not only baseball, but also, medical science. Charlie Grimm is another one that's important, I feel, because Charlie Grimm is kind of obscure, of course, but he ended up winning 3 pennants as the player manager and later just manager for the Cubs. And then he managed the Braves. And I think Charlie Grimm is Hank Aaron's first major league manager. So he has some import. He's also the first manager of the Braves in Milwaukee. So he has some historical importance, but he also appears in a bunch of these great sets. Another little hidden gem of collecting obscure players is that if you collect Charlie Grimm, you can get a card in these sets. You can get a card in Worldwide Gum at a reasonable price. You can get a card in, and I'll show it in a second. Let me get to these. Sorry about this is a American Caramel E126. You see on the screen there. I don't really want to buy too many cards from that set because it's kind of rare, and they have Ty Cobb and Babe Ruth, but you can get if you're a type collector, you can get an E126 relatively cheap, less than $100. And if you choose to get somebody like Charlie Grimm. So another player I like to collect, and there's Charlie Grimm. The card on the right is Tattoo Orbit. Again, another set that's going to be really expensive if you're collecting the top players. The card on the right, I'm sorry, is Tattoo Orbit. The card on the left is the cigar card. And I did an entire video on this. It's the Denby cigar cards. And I'll link to the video. It is my single least watched video, where I took the writing off a back of a postcard mailed out during World War I and traced it back to the people who owned the cigar company that produced Denby cigars. So then I went out and got a Denby cigars card. And Charlie Grimm is this pop 6 or pop 7. And Charlie Grimm is the highest pop of that set. So really nice way to get a type collector there, but also just kind of hooked into a really nice historical story. Bucky Walters is another one. A guy that went from being a third baseman to a pitcher, a great pitcher, the best pitcher in the major leagues for a couple of years. In fact, the 1939 MVP of the National League. Just a terrific story. And not a Hall of Famer, close to it, but look at those issues he's in there. He's in Worldwide Gum. That's his rookie card. He's also in the 1939 Cincinnati Reds. It's the W572. No, not W572. I forget what the number is, but it's a, or 711. That's what it is. It's W711-2. And then he's got a Propagandist Montiel card, which is, those 3 terrific issues that you get to collect because you collect a guy like Bucky Walters, who is, in my mind, historically relevant. Another one's pre-war is George Mullin. George Mullin was a fantastic pitcher who nearly won 30 games in the season. One year he won 29 games, had 2 starts left in the season and couldn't eke out that 30th win. But he was like a workhorse for the Tigers, pre-war era Ty Cobb teams. And, he's in so many different issues, and you get a Deitch postcard out of it for, I don't know what I spent on that, but certainly not what you would spend on a Cobb. And then there's the T205. Sorry, I should have put these in order before I picked them out. There we go. And then the American Caramel, the E90-1, a beautiful card at a 4 that if this was a Hall of Fame player would have cost me 3 times what I spent on it. So you're getting decent players. You're getting historically relevant players. And then there's also historically relevant players for important reasons beyond baseball, American culture. Adolfo Luque is, I think, the first great Cuban star, and he played from 1914 to 1938 or something like that. He was around for a very long time, and he managed afterwards. He's in the Nielsen Chocolate set. He's in the York Caramel set. And he's just a really interesting person to collect. But more importantly, collecting Dolph Luque is preserving Cuban baseball history. Otherwise, he would be forgotten to history. He shouldn't be forgotten to history because he's a really important player for cultural reasons and historical reasons. And there's his 1933 Gaudi and the Caramelo Deportivo of, this is the 46, 47. He also has a 45, 46. That's a Pop 1, and happy to own it. And then finally, there is Joe Black. Joe Black is kind of like Bill James, was a supernova who had a fantastic season and then got arm injuries and kind of faded out in his baseball career. But Joe Black was a college-educated man who came into the major leagues for the Dodgers in 52 and was terrific. He was like their relief ace. And then by the end of the season, Charlie Dressen started putting him in the starting rotation. 1952 World Series, Game 1, he became the first African-American pitcher to start a game in the World Series and win a game in the World Series. The 1952 World Series was a 7-game series that took place in 7 days, and Joe Black started 3 of those games. He came into spring training in 1953. They tried to make him throw from different arm angles, and he ended up hurting his shoulder, I believe, or his elbow. He ultimately got traded to Cincinnati. But Joe Black stayed around the game for a long time and was a great advocate for retired players before the union was really involved in that. And so Joe Black actually is not only historically relevant as a player, as a pioneer, as an African-American pioneer, also as a advocate for players. And Joe Black did a lot of signings over the years, including this wonderful photograph that I got for, I think, $15 maybe. This is Joe Black. I believe it's the spring training of 53. I don't think he was in spring training in 52. I think he came up from the minor leagues later in the season, maybe a month into the season. But here he is with a signature right on the white of his uniform. And I think for $15, this is an absolute steal. So that's what I got to show you there. It's important to me that people understand that this is my way of collecting. My way of collecting is those 5 things: fun, history, art, nostalgia, and value. And when it comes to history, not every card that I collect needs to be a top level first level Hall of Famer. hobby relevant. I mean, to me, hobby relevance is what I want it to be. And what I want it to be sometimes is an obscure player who I think has a great story. And I am honored to be the caretaker of that card. And somebody who can talk about who that person is and be the caretaker of that person's history and be able to talk about it. I'm trying still very hard to get Dolph Camilli's daughter to come on my channel. I have a family connection, friendship connection with her. And the reason why I think it would be great for her to come on the channel is because she's actively collecting pieces of her father's past, baseball cards and pictures and things like that. And so am I. And I'm collecting it because not only is it important for me to preserve the history of a great player like Dolph Camilli, who won the 1941 National League MVP, but also now because I feel a connection to him. And so that's really what it is. That's really what the video is today. It's essentially just me telling you why I collect obscure guys. And I feel like if you want to comment below and tell me, am I crazy? Am I wasting my time? Am I wasting my money? Am I putting myself in a position where somehow or another I'm excuse me, spokesperson for these obscure players who no one would remember, and they're not being remembered for because they weren't important? I don't know. If you want to take a counterpoint to this, I would love to hear an alternative argument for it, but I feel like people keep saying the best way to collect is to collect the way you want to collect, and this is the way I want to collect, and I feel like it's important for me to be honest about it. So anyway, folks, 20-minute video today. I will be back during the week. I'll be at 4 Collectors. I'm doing a show that's going to record tomorrow and be on the channel on Tuesday, and another one recording tomorrow night, which will be on the channel on Thursday. So, and then I'm doing a live stream for the weekend of the Philly show on the 21st. So anyway, folks, we will see you soon. We'll see you back here next week, and we'll see you in 4